Hi, everyone. So glad to have you here with us today. I'm Dr. Margo Jacot, your mental health business mentor, where we talk about all things related to the business and the practice of mental health. And today we're going to be talking about our own mental health and how that impacts the work that we do. And specifically, right now, most of us have to do some go get in order to have our tribe, in order to fill our practices. And that takes energy. And if we're exhausted, guess what, folks? I mean, I don't have to tell you. I think many of us have been there. It's a lot harder to do. Today's guest is Natasha D'Arcangelo. Natasha is a licensed mental health counselor in the states of Florida, Idaho, Iowa, and Washington, and a licensed professional counselor in the states of Delaware, Oregon, South Carolina, and Virginia. She's also a Florida qualified supervisor. She received her Master of Arts in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Argosy University, Sarasota. She's the Chief Clinical Officer for LB Health and the owner of D'Arcangelo Counseling. She's the Chief Clinical Officer for LB Health and the owner of D'Arcangelo Counseling and Consulting, LLC. Her previous experience includes working as an educator in an inpatient psychiatric setting, community mental health, private practice, the nonprofit sector, and mental health tech. She's an international speaker who has presented on various topics, most often on compassion fatigue. Welcome, Natasha D'Arcangelo. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, so right now, I think we have compassion fatigue, we have world fatigue, we have, I was telling you about my allergies. There are a lot of things right now in our world, in our lives, that can be contributing to us just being exhausted. And boy, this is the kind of job where we can't just snooze our way through a day.
Correct.
So let's talk a little bit about compassion fatigue. There are lots of people who have talked about compassion fatigue, but let's start with, how do you define it? What are you talking about when you're talking about compassion fatigue?
Absolutely. So, the most widely used definition of compassion fatigue was put together by Dr. Charles Figley back in 1995. He's the one that really thought that this was a phenomenon that needed to be studied amongst professional caregivers. And so, that's the definition that I use when you do a literature review. That's what's out there. And so, he defines compassion fatigue as a combination of burnout and secondary trauma. So, it is a state of exhaustion and dysfunction that comes about biologically, psychologically, and socially as a result of prolonged exposure to compassion stress and all that it invokes. So, those of us that are professional caregivers, mental health professionals, educators, physicians, nurses, first responders, hospice workers, people that take care of people for a living, we are much more prone to developing symptoms of compassion fatigue. So that's the definition that I go by. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, Charles Figley, I remember when he came out with this concept, and there was so much discussion about, well, how is it different than burnout? Isn't that what burnout is? But they're really not the same thing. So can you
Correct.
differentiate between the two?
Sure. So burnout is essentially half of the equation, right? And I do think that a lot of people get the two things mixed up. The difference between burnout and compassion fatigue is burnout comes about as a result of our responses to our work environment. So it feels like they're putting a lot of pressure on us. I worked in community mental health, right? And so there was a lot of pressure about billing for the department. How many sessions are you getting in a month? And so it's that demanding and toxic work environment and our response to it. Whereas
Mm.
compassion fatigue also includes that added element of the secondary traumatic stress, which the first thing that we take a look at is that's caused by witnessing or interacting with people that are suffering or people that are traumatized. For example, listening to narratives like that over and over again. And as a clinician who sees people that I specialize in trauma, that's something that probably would be the first bullet point in my resume, right? That's what I do is I sit with people in the most painful times of their lives. A lot of those symptoms with the secondary traumatic stress are very similar to what we're looking at with PTSD when we're those subcategories of the intrusion and the avoidance symptoms. The thing with secondary traumatic stress, though, is that we're not good at recognizing it within ourselves. It's normally the people around us that are observing, you don't quite seem like yourself. There's something kind of, we tend to get very defensive. We don't want to admit it, but that's usually where we're hearing it is from the people around us. And I had the privilege of doing almost all of my training on compassion fatigue with Dr. Eric Gentry, who is amazing, and his work really transformed my life. I mean, it wasn't
Mhm.
until I did my training with him that I realized how many times in my career I'd been neck deep in compassion fatigue. I didn't have a name for it. I thought that there was something wrong with me. And
Uh-huh.
so being able to see it from a lens of self-compassion, understanding what was happening at a neuroscience level, really transformed things for me. And so I feel very honored to be able to get the word out about Dr. Gentry's research and his work and
Mhm.
help other clinicians be more sustainable in what they're doing. Yeah.
Which we really need right now. Natasha, will you speak a little bit more to that idea of self-compassion? Because we're
Yes.
great at it for others, but boy, if I'm not doing well, shame on me, right? I
Yes.
mean, not
Yes.
really, but I mean, people can feel that way, like, what's wrong with me? And so, will you speak a bit more to self-compassion?
Absolutely. So there's a myth that I want to bust. And I think that a lot of the talk now out there is on self care. And I consider it victim blaming because it makes us sound as though we're doing this to ourselves. If we would only go on more walks or do more yoga or go get more massages, then we wouldn't be so tired as mental health clinicians.
Mhm.
And if only that were true, even if I had the discretionary income to go get a massage every day, you can't self care your way out of compassion fatigue. That's not a solution, right? So I want to get that out of the way. And the other lens of it is this. So you mentioned in my bio that I'm a former educator. I did
Mhm.
not last in the classroom for very long. Now, looking back on it, I know that it was because I was struggling with compassion fatigue. I did not have a name for it. I
Mhm.
thought that I was a failure as a person, that the reason that I didn't last in the classroom is because there was something fundamentally wrong with me. And I spent
Mhm.
all of this time and all of this money getting a master's degree in education only for me to walk away from this field. I am now
Mhm.
very grateful that I did that because I always say I have a teacher's brain. I don't know how to shut it off, but it very much influences the work that I do as a therapist. Fun fact, the teen clients that I've worked with always know. I don't have to tell them.
Okay.
Did you Are you a teacher?
Uh-huh. Right.
They can smell me out from a mile away. But now I can look back on it through the lens of I didn't know that it was compassion fatigue. I didn't have a name for what I was experiencing. And so I no longer describe it as my, failed educator job. It was that I didn't have the knowledge and the tools that I needed to really help dig me out of that pit. And now I can look back on that time of my life and be grateful that I did have that experience and that knowledge, again, because it does very much influence the work that I do now, right?
Mhm.
I feel like the biggest thing that it's given me, especially with the presentations that I do, is having written as many lesson plans as I did. I really feel like it gives me the ability to connect with an audience and get my point across in a way that
Mhm.
doesn't sound hopefully too incredibly academic or out of
Uh-huh.
reach, and that it
Yeah.
just makes sense to people. So there are some days that I'm better at regulating my nervous system than others. That
Mhm.
doesn't make me a failure, that just makes me human. But the self compassion piece of things is huge. And I think it's missing in a lot of the discussions that we have when
Yes.
we talk to clinicians, when clinicians are speaking, even to themselves, we tend to be very ashamed of talking about the hard stuff that we do. And I don't know, I think there's always a fear of judgment there. I think there's some stigma around it. I think there continues to be this attitude of, I mean, you chose to do this. Nobody told you to become a mental health clinician. Why are you struggling? You did this to yourself, right?
Right. You did this to yourself,
Yeah.
which we did. I don't know about you in graduate school. I don't know that I mean, this was a minute ago, but I don't know that we ever talked about compassion. I mean, compassion fatigue wasn't around back then in the 80s when I was in graduate school. But to your point, I think it happens to a lot of us.
Yes.
There's a lot of shame around it, and we can't just self care our way out of it. So, self care, I'm assuming, it can be helpful in staving it off. Like we can't just not take care of ourselves. It's got to be mission critical. But if and when, and I hate to say when, but if and when we land in a place of compassion fatigue, like you, I've worked with trauma just about my whole career. And I think it can be trauma, it can be anxiety, it can be depression, it can be pretty much anything. I don't think
Hmm.
people who work with CBT as much would feel it, but who knows?
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll get some messages from people saying, wait a minute. But my thought is, from what you're saying, boy, we need something much more robust. So, what do we do when we find ourselves in that understandable place? Hopefully, for starters, we give ourselves some grace.
Hmm.
We say, of course, this is natural. It happens in people's nervous systems. It
Yes.
happens because of the nature of the work. It's because I am showing up for people. This is normative. But now what do I do about it? So great. I hope I can have some grace. What else do I do?
Yeah. So, the place that you have to start is by turning your lens inward. And as many clinicians as I've presented to, it continues to amaze me how great we are, I think, at doing psychoeducation for the clients that we serve, and how great we are at compartmentalizing it and not applying that stuff to ourselves. Because inevitably, when I do a presentation to clinicians, I had the privilege of serving as the keynote speaker for growth therapy. They did a summit in September. And so I had a
Congratulations.
live audience. I was in a room with them, and that's my favorite way to present.
Mhm.
And so I asked folks about their ACEs and how many of them were familiar with their own ACEs score. So when I asked the question, do you know what the ACEs are? Almost every hand goes up, right? The adverse childhood experiences, we're familiar with that. Many of us will often speak to clients about that as a contributing factor, especially when we're talking about trauma and how it's impacting present behavior. But when I follow that up with, do you know what your own ACEs score is as a clinician? Not nearly as many hands went up. But the truth is, we are not immune from those things, right? All of us have our origin story and why we went into becoming a mental health practitioner. For a lot of us, it does come from a place of some kind of trauma, some kind of hurt. Inevitably, there's that through line of wanting to make a difference. But you have to be able to recognize that your intersectional identities come into the room with you. Part of your intersectional identity is your ACEs score. If you're not aware of your own traumas and how they're impacting your present day behavior, and I'm talking about at a physiological level, what's happening as you're sitting in these sessions with clients is your nervous system is becoming activated. Again, not something that you're consciously doing. You're not sitting in session thinking to yourself, this client is some kind of threat to me. But if you have, I'll make up a hypothetical, if you have an ACEs score of 8 and it's pretty high, right? 8 out of 10, and you're working with a client whose ACEs score also happens to be 8. And this client has a history of childhood trauma. They grew up in a home with caregivers that maybe used substances and were physically and verbally abusive, right? So they're sitting in session with you and they're recounting something from their childhood that very much mirrors probably some of the same experiences that you had. Your nervous system is now kicking into activated mode, right? You're now in fight or flight. And for the next 50 minutes, you're fighting with your own nervous system that's telling you that you need to get out of this situation. But this client has paid for their time with you, And so you're forcing yourself to ignore all of those signs that your nervous system is sending you. And you're essentially re traumatizing yourself in that process because you're not allowing your system to do what it needs to do.
Mhm.
If you can recognize that this narrative that your client is sharing with you is not in the present moment a real life threatening danger, and you can get your parasympathetic nervous system back online using some different self regulation tools, you can sit in session with that client being more present than if you were fighting your nervous system. And when you walk away from that session, you're not going to walk away feeling as exhausted because you haven't spent the last 50 minutes fighting this internal battle to force yourself to stay in the presence of that client, right? I think that we do a disservice to clinicians coming into the field because what I was taught is that it was only a matter of time before I burned out. I don't know if it's going to take you 5 years. I don't know if it's going to take you 15 years, but eventually you're going to burn out, which I don't think is a very nice message to send to clinicians entering the field.
Right.
But I now know through my teachings with Dr. Gentry, I get to choose how long I can remain in this field. I now have the skills that I need in order to be sustainable. And that was incredibly empowering for me.
Mhm.
Because really before that, it's like this sort of Damocles hanging over your head. You don't know when that moment is that you're going to break. And I've had moments in my career where, I mean, I would pull up in the parking lot of my job and I would have to talk myself into walking into the building because there was not a cell in my body that wanted to go into work that day. I was so exhausted. And for me, it was never about the work with the clients. That's what drives me to come back day after day. But it was about the bureaucracy and the powers that be, and these often unrealistic expectations that we're held to in a field where we are by and large undervalued and underpaid, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so that's the foundation of things. You have to be able to differentiate between, is this a real threat or is this a perceived threat? You got to use some self-regulation skills. I'm quoting Dr. Gentry's. He's got like a 5-piece immunization recipe to help combat compassion fatigue. Part of which is all that stuff that we tell clients to do about sleeping well and eating well and
Mhm.
exercising. Guess
Mhm.
what? We need to
Yep.
be doing that stuff too. We also have to be good at connecting to other people. And I think that clinicians that are in private practice, we tend to silo ourselves, especially once we went virtual. It just
Mhm.
was honestly a lot easier. I mean, here I am in my office by myself, except for the therapy
Mhm.
dog. And we don't connect to other people. And that's one of the things that leads us down the path of compassion fatigue. And the other huge piece of things for me was getting back to my reason for doing this work. One of the exercises Dr. Gentry has us do is writing our mission statement. And
Mhm.
for me, the most powerful sentence in my mission statement is my purpose here on this planet is to help others. And so any day that I'm able to help somebody else, I am living according to my own personal mission. I am leading my life with my moral compass headed due north. And that's a day that I have succeeded.
Mhm.
Whether my boss thinks I've succeeded or not, or whether my performance review reflects that, that's another story. But according to my own personal definition of success, any day that I've helped somebody is a day that I have succeeded. And so being
Mhm.
able to flip from that external locus of control to that internal locus of control
Mhm.
has been another huge piece of things for me. I also
Mhm.
thankfully have made some career changes to places and companies that recognize that I am driven by my own moral compass. And so
Mhm.
I'm not being measured by these artificial, did you complete X number of sessions in a month metrics anymore? I have been at those places. I've
Mhm.
never completed a degree in counseling to, you know, be doing X number of sessions in a month. That was never going to be something that fulfilled me
Mhm.
long term. So it's a
And it's
multi
not part of your mission statement.
correct. Correct, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I love the idea. And folks, that's a great takeaway. Maybe sit down at some point and think about what is your personal mission statement. And a mission statement is essentially, why am I here? Why do I exist in this field? Not necessarily the existential of why do I exist in the world, although if you want to take it there, fine. But
Sure.
why do I exist in this field? What is my mission here? I love that. So certainly in different parts of the country, and without trying to make this about politics, there are many therapists who are struggling from a social justice perspective.
Yes.
Certainly, I'm located in the Chicagoland area. There has been a lot happening here recently around immigration and immigrant rights and all of that sort of thing, documented people, undocumented people. It's been really very intense. And I've noticed that the amount of stress, the amount of compassion fatigue, because it's compassion for our clients, but then
Yes.
it's compassion for the world right
Mhm.
now, compassion for people we're seeing who are really in that moment, right? It's happening outside of our places of work or our places of residence or whatever, or we're seeing it on the news or wherever we're seeing it. How do we manage all of that in our nervous system? Because it seems to me, just from what I understand about the brain, body, and nervous system, that makes perfect sense to me that we need to be aware of and regulating our nervous system all day long.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you tell me, this is your area of
Yeah,
expertise.
absolutely. So I live in Florida, and I always say I don't claim Florida. I claim New York. That's where I'm from. I,
Reside
I
there,
live
yeah,
in
right.
Florida, and there are a lot of political shenanigans going on down here right now. And so I think that there are a couple of different ways to approach that. When when I do my presentation, I actually presented at the Counselors for Social Justice had their inaugural conference in April earlier this year in San Juan. And when I opened, I said, I cannot fix, and I don't intend to fix the weight of the world that we are experiencing right now. I think that unless you do the work that we do as clinicians and we sit in this, it's just this very interesting juxtaposition of we do the work that we do because we care so deeply about other people. And
Mhm.
when we see these injustices happen, I think that it weighs on us more heavily
Mhm.
as humans, just as a baseline. And then we spend our day sitting in session with people who are trans and having their rights stripped away from them, who are undocumented and are terrified to leave their homes, right? I have a single mom that I'm working with right now who has no idea how she's going to feed her child right now in the middle of this government shutdown. And so
Mhm.
we feel these things keenly, not just as humans, but also in the work that we're doing in the sessions that we're sitting in every day. And being in a regulated nervous system can't fix those things, and I don't claim that it can. But what it can do is this: if we are exhausted, burned out, angry, I have spent many of my days this year being very, very angry. We can't do the work at the macro level that we need to do in order to be making things better for the clients that we serve. And so
Mhm.
that's the lens that I try to use in order to get myself back into a regulated nervous system. And I do think that every clinician at this point needs to be doing macro work. What that looks like for you is going to be very different. However, that ship has long since sailed. We need to be doing work at the macro level in order to be doing real social justice impact stuff,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But you can't do it if you're angry. And I understand that you're angry. I'm angry too. However, if we're going to make real, long lasting, impactful change for the clients that we are working with, we can't do it in bodies that are exhausted and that are angry, because then we're also not being fully present for our clients in those sessions, right?
Mhm.
And so, yes, you need to be self regulating your way through the day. Absolutely, in your sessions with clients, whether you're showing up to things like the No Kings protests or going to the Hill, whatever that looks like for
Mhm.
you. you have to be doing that in a regulated body. Otherwise, you're not going to be sustainable. And if you're not sustainable, then you're not going to be actually making change.
Mm.
And I think as a field, we need to be called to doing that work at the state level, at the federal level, because we see this keenly every day. And I think the reason we feel it so deeply is because it's tied into that concept of moral injury, right? There's only so much we
Right.
can do to help clients in individual sessions when the systems that exist
Mhm.
are what's really causing the mental health damage to clients
Mhm.
who don't have access to health insurance, who don't know where they're going to get their next meal from. And so, again, we sit at a very interesting crossroads of being humans who feel things more deeply by the very nature of what we do. And also, I think we carry the pain of the clients that we serve in many ways.
Mhm.
And we don't talk about it with each other, and we really should.
Right. That's right.
Because you can't do this work as an island. You just can't.
Well, which brings us to the other point we wanted to talk about today. Because Natasha, I mean, I'm nodding my head. I'm like one of those old dogs on the dashboard, I mean, agreeing with everything you're saying wholeheartedly. And we need our tribe. And to your point, especially since the pandemic, I'm in my home office right now. I do go into our actual physical office a couple days a week, but I know lots of clinicians who are sitting in their homes. They don't have their therapy tribe, their co-therapist, their other therapists tribe in the way that they did before.
Yeah.
And now they're exhausted on top of it and feeling discouraged and powerless and frustrated. How do people go about doing that and making those connections when we're in this state?
So I think that there is great power in connecting to some of your professional organizations. So, for example, as a licensed mental health counselor and licensed professional counselor, I am a member of the American Counseling Association.
Mhm.
I'm also a member of the American Mental Health Counselors Association. And
Mhm.
every national organization is also going to have state organizations as well. And so I'm also a member of the Florida Counseling Association and FOMCA, which is the Florida Mental Health Counseling Association. And I've joined their social media groups. They're on both of those folks happen to be on Facebook. And I try to go to whether it be virtual or in person events. I try to attend some different networking things.
Mhm.
And you have to start with one event. You have to start with one.
Mhm.
And it will take some investment of your time, it will take some investment of your energy. And as somebody, I describe myself as an introvert. Peopling is hard for me. It makes me very, very tired.
Mhm.
Um, and so I typically can only do like maybe one a week, one every other
Mhm.
week. But it is very important that you are getting out, whether that's virtual or in person or a combination of both, and
Mhm.
meeting other people. If you're not talking to other clinicians, you're going to continue to be siloed and you're going to continue to feel isolated. And as our CEO says, one of our taglines at LB Health is that isolation lies. And isolation will lie to you and tell you that you're the only one feeling exhausted, that you're the only one feeling burned out by this stuff. So I would recommend you start with your professional organizations. It's
Mhm.
also really important, and we all know that we can't be everybody's therapist, right? So even if you're not looking at it through the lens of how is this something that could benefit me personally, you need to have a referral network, right? I am not good at couples counseling. I tried it a couple of times. It is not a strength of mine. I like having one other person in the room with me.
Uh-huh.
But I know some really great couples counselors because I've gone
Mhm.
out and done some networking events and I've met them. So when I have a client that I think their relationship could probably also benefit from couples counseling, I'm going to
Mhm.
make that referral, right? Eating disorder work is also not a strength of mine. I don't have any good training in that. I'm going to refer those clients out, right?
Mhm.
So you also need to have a strong referral base of things that are not in your wheelhouse that you know you're going to refer out for. So it's going to also be beneficial for you business wise. And maybe that's a way that you get more motivated to get out there and to
Mhm.
meet other people. Especially one of the things that I see most often coming across my feed is people that are just setting out into their own private practice and they're trying to figure out, how do I get my name out there? How do I let clients know that I'm available? Well, other
Mhm.
clinicians need to know that you're out there. Other
Mhm.
clinicians need to know the work that you're doing. Like, I'm a brain spotting practitioner. Not
Mhm.
everybody does brain spotting.
Mhm.
And so those are things that set me apart. And if you're not getting out there and meeting other people, they don't know that they can refer to you. And sometimes those are the most impactful referrals. Because I
Absolutely.
think as a field, ideally, we're very good in that intake, or I know some clinicians also do consult calls. If we can pretty much recognize early on, this is just not going to be a good fit clinically,
Mhm.
and it sounds like you really could benefit from some couples counseling. That's not a thing that I do well. Let me give you the name of somebody that I know, and
Mhm.
I'm going to recommend that you reach out to them. If you still feel like you need individual counseling, you know where to find me, but I'm going to go
Mhm.
ahead and make that recommendation. And I think that those tend to be very powerful follow throughs on the client's
Mhm.
part when they follow up with that clinician.
That's right. I think the data definitely support that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the idea of having to go out and connect with other therapists or do networking, during the pandemic, people who started their practice during the pandemic thought, oh, clients fall out of the sky onto my couch, into my chair, into my office, on my screen. And now the world is going back to what it was really pre-pandemic, which
Yeah.
was, yes, there's a lot of need, there are plenty of clients to go around, but not everybody knows we exist. And a lot of practices popped up during that time. So
Mhm.
not only are we having to put out energy when we're sitting with our clients, now we have to have extra energy to get those clients in the door. And to your point, starting small, right? And not everybody, to your point, likes to go to networking events. But if you can go to one, Natasha, that sounds like a great idea. Or is there somebody who you can say, would you be wanting to go get a cup of tea? Come up to my
Yes.
office. Let's have a coffee.
Yes.
15, 20 minutes just to kind of say hi and get like low impact start, especially if you don't have energy. Sounds
Yeah.
like you're inviting people to really figure out what their system needs and honor that versus plowing through it, which we would never advise a client to do anyway.
Correct.
So Natasha, what would you say then are your top three takeaways for our listeners that have to do with compassion fatigue? What do you want them to make sure to go home with today?
Number one, if any of that resonates with you and you feel like it's been kind of on the back of my mind, but I'm not entirely sure, it's okay. That makes you normal.
Mm.
um, we've all been there. We've all been there. And it's not unusual for us to be there at more than one point in our career. There's a great tool out there called the ProQual. It's PROQOL. They're on their fifth iteration. So right now it's the ProQual 5, but the website is proqual.org and it's free. And I like things that are free. But if you go
Right.
to proqual.org, you can take their assessment, and it's a really nice objective way to measure your symptoms of compassion fatigue. And so that's where I always recommend folks start. If you don't know where you're at, then you can't possibly put a plan in place for helping you get to a better place. Yes?
Mhm. Mm.
I think it's also really important that we take a step back and reconnect to our why and remind ourselves of why we got into this work that we're doing. The longer that we're in it, and the more that we're in these systems that are not really designed to support us as empathetic beings, I
Mhm.
think it's very easy to drift away from our purpose, our mission behind what we do. And so
Mhm.
think about reconnecting to what that looks like. One of the things Dr. Gentry says that will always stay with me is that your integrity is worth more than your reputation. You don't want to lose that piece of you that drives you. And
Mhm.
honestly, that's what clients are drawn to anyways, right? How many
Exactly.
studies have come out that have told us that it's that therapeutic relationship, single biggest predictor of whether or not
Mhm.
therapy is going to be successful for somebody? And I guess the third one would be, again, I'm an introvert. If you told high school me that I would have a side gig presenting to
Mm.
audiences around the world, I would have
Uh-huh.
laughed you out of the room.
Uh-huh. Go you.
And so it feeds your soul in a different way to be
Mhm.
in a room full of clinicians who get what you're doing at the cellular level. They
Mm.
understand what it's like to sit with people in their deepest, darkest moments and to hold that pain. I really feel like the work that we do is sacred.
Mhm.
And nobody gets that better than other people that do this work.
Mm.
And it's going to be uncomfortable, yes, if you're like me and you're not naturally wanting to people.
Mhm. Like
It,
most of us, I
yeah,
think. Yeah.
it's going to be uncomfortable. It is going to be tiring. I try
Mhm.
to, if I know I'm going to a networking event, I try to make sure that my sessions are arranged accordingly because I'm not going to do good session work that day. I'm going to be tired. And I know that
Right.
about myself, right?
Mhm.
It is going to be tiring, but I do think that it is a really, really good way for us to continue to feed ourselves. And you have
Mhm.
to, because we're so good at convincing ourselves that we're the only ones that are
Mhm.
feeling tired and burned out. And
Mhm.
collectively, as a field, we really need to be supporting one another right now.
Very well said. So assess where we are. We can't get to where we're going if we don't know where we are at the moment.
Mhm.
Reconnect with our purpose and our mission and connect with others because they will get us and that will support us at a cellular level, at a nervous system level, our brain, body, nervous system, the whole package. And nobody that I think that's true is going to get us like another therapist does. And same for us for them. So for those who are struggling with, I don't know if I can take that on for myself, you might be able to give just as much as you get from that scenario. So those are wonderful, wonderful suggestions. Natasha D'Arcangelo, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I know you do a lot of speaking. As you said, you have this incredible side gig. You do like big talks. So thank you for taking time today to come on our podcast and share your wisdom with our listeners.
Thank you so
If
much for having me.
well, and if people want to get a hold of you, we'll have your information in the show notes. But what is your preferred way for people to connect with you?
Honestly, it's probably easiest to reach me at LB Health. It's L like the letter L and B like the animal, BEE. LBhealth.com. We are doing, pretty impactful work at our company. And so that's the email that I check most frequently. So I am Natasha at LB Health or we are LBhealth.com. So feel free to check out the website, and that's going to be the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Excellent. All right, folks, there you have it. Natasha D'Arcangelo, thank you so much. All of you who are here today listening, thank you for joining us. Please join us again next time. Take good care of yourselves and your nervous systems and each other, and be well.